26, 27, 28E, finally. I spent the last few hours racing across London, lugging a suitcase up and down escalators, trying to get from Gatwick to Heathrow in what honestly feels like record time. These are the most inconvenient flights, but they were all I could get at just a few hours' notice. As I make my way to seat 28E, the plane around me is a chorus of chaos. There are babies crying, there are people talking on their phone, there are people excitedly talking about what they're going to do when they get to Dubai, and I'm just trying to catch my breath. Before the plane takes off, I make my way to that tiny, cramped airplane bathroom and stare at myself in the mirror, wiping away the sweat when I feel that buzz in my pocket of another update text. I quickly open my phone, open the text message, click to open. Your dad didn't make it. I really thought I was going to make it. A few hours, that was all I needed. A few hours and I'd have been able to hold his hand. A few hours and I'd have been able to say goodbye. I don't even think I packed a funeral suit. The last time I wore one was only 4 years ago at my mother's funeral. As I walked past strangers back to that seat 28E, I had this realization. For all of my life, I'd been a passenger, following my parents, guiding me and supporting me. But all of a sudden, with one text message, I was right up there in the pilot seat, and I could feel the warning lights going on all around me. All of these ideas about the future and who I was start fading away. I imagine the picture of me at my graduation on my wall at home, with parents proudly standing on either side of me. Gone. I imagine my wedding day, looking out into my crowd of loved ones in the future, my parents beaming back at me. Gone. I imagine my garden in the future, my kids running about with their granddad, my dad, spraying them with a hose as they laugh. Gone. As I'm sitting on that plane, I'm feeling all of this loss and this grief, but I'm also feeling anger. Why was this happening to me? Have I not lost enough? Is this my fault? 10 years earlier, growing up in Scotland, I remember Christmas morning. I ran through to my parents' room, jumped on the bed with my stocking. My dad would get a vinyl, pop it on the record player. My mum would be taking the rollers out of her hair while I'd be eagerly unwrapping a latest Lego creation that I'd got. I already knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. You see, the living room downstairs in my house, I had taken over. The entire windowsill was covered in Lego creations. There were castles and there were schools and fire stations, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Later on in the morning, we're downstairs. I remember hearing my dad calling through from the kitchen. "Edward, look outside, it's snowing." I remember rushing through the discarded wrapping paper, going up to those big brown thick curtains at the window, pulling with all of my might, and crash. Months of Lego creations came smashing down into pieces all around me. I was devastated. Even more so when it turned out it wasn't even snowing. My dad had just been teasing. I spent that entire Christmas so angry. It didn't matter about my loved ones or my family or the presents that I got. I was so focused on blaming myself for what I'd lost. After dinner, I was still in an almighty huff when my dad took me to the side. "Edward, enough. It was an accident. There's nothing you could do." "But son, you've got all the pieces. You could create something new. You could rebuild." I wonder if my dad knew then. One day I'd feel like that, just broken. I blame myself that I would need to rebuild. I felt that crash on that airplane at 20 years old with a text message. And all of a sudden, I was realizing how much I needed to take control. But my identity started fading long before that moment. It turns out there was a fourth person at that Christmas, a stranger. A friend of my parents who at first would come around every once in a while, but as the years went on, became a permanent part of my family, and I began to detest them. Suddenly, this stranger was at every family gathering and trip. My parents loved having their friend round. My dad would bring out his guitar, plucking away to entertain the group, singing all the wrong words to American Pie. And I would sit in my room, ignoring it all, as laughing and singing inevitably turned to shouting and crying. I never knew when the stranger was coming over, so I stopped inviting any of my friends because I didn't want to be ashamed. I never knew what my parents were going to be like when the stranger was there, so I knew I had to be there to keep them safe. By the time the stranger was there every single day, I barely recognized my parents. It was like they were on autopilot. I was banging on the door, trying to get them to wake up, but they were completely under the control of the stranger. They didn't even know how much of a stranger to themselves they'd become. And no matter how much I tried to get their attention, they were gone. At 16, that stranger murdered my mother. And at 20, they struck again and killed my father. The stranger could be in this room right here today. I know I could feel them haunting me. You see, the stranger isn't a person. It's not someone we can lock up and throw away the key. For my parents, addiction was the stranger that took control. Alcohol was the poison that consumed who they were and faded my identity. And I was terrified. How long was it going to be before the stranger took control of me? How long was it going to be before there was a gravestone with my name on it? But it wasn't just the shadow of addiction that was holding me back and fading who I was. A few years later, as a teenager, I was growing up in the Middle East. And while I was avoiding that stranger infiltrating my home, I found somewhere safe. The theater. Something about performing on a stage in school productions felt safe, wearing a mask. That year, I'd auditioned for The Importance of Being Earnest. I'd done all sorts of plays before that. I'd been an arrogant English school teacher. I'd performed in William Shakespeare. I'd had my first kiss with a girl rehearsing for a rom-com in the drama rooms. I was waiting to find out if I'd got a part in The Importance of Being Earnest when I got an urgent email home. You probably could have told I was a bit of a nerd in school, so getting urgent messages home asking my parents in for meetings was not usual for me. I was panicked. What had I done? Who had I offended? Was I getting expelled? Oh my God! So as we walked in, me and my dad went into the school, all the way up to the top floor, and sat down at the desk of my friendly Irish drama teacher when he started to explain. As you know, here in the Middle East, we maybe have different traditions about relationships that you might not be used to back where you're from in the West and in Europe. We're thinking of doing something a little bit different with the school production this year, and management have asked me to get explicit permission from all of the parents. As you may know, it's a bit of a theatre tradition that sometimes men play the parts of women. Edward did a great audition, and we'd like to offer him the part of Lady Bracknell. Whoa. Not the answer I was expected, but yes, I got a part. Hooray! Exciting. But how is my dad going to react to this? He'd always supported me in the past. And that was when my silly Glaswegian shipyard dad said something that would have went down great in the pub without even thinking about it. Oh, aye, sure. Just don't turn him into a poof. Suddenly at 16, with the strict rules of the country that I lived in and a flippant comment from my daft dad, set a limit on who I could be. I continued with the play. I'm sure I brushed it off, but a seed of shame had been planted. Looking back now, I don't remember anything about that play. I don't know a single line. I don't know the plot. I don't know who my character was. I also know I've never taken part in another play again. Suddenly, somewhere that felt safe became exposing. I turned that autopilot on myself. Relationships, straight or otherwise, became something I just couldn't entertain. No, not for me. Can't think about it. I had to limit who I was because I was trying so hard to fit in, to save people, to try and hide who I was, that I became a stranger to myself. Well, 5 words changed that. That text message on that plane meant that I was in the pilot seat. I was in control, and all of a sudden I realized there's a version of me in here. I know it. I needed to see those warning lights and take control of who I was. I started with the stranger. I became the first person in my family to banish the stranger. I've never touched a drop of alcohol in my life, and I'm determined to not let autopilot control me and destroy me in the way I had to watch my parents be destroyed. I embrace my role as the designated driver, the first one up on the dance floor. And while I might not always fit in, I know that I want to do better for myself than the stranger will ever let me. I then took control of my relationships. I uncovered those layers of shame that had built up inside of me and started finding people who could love and trust me no matter what I was interested in. And while a seed of shame had been planted, I was in charge of whether it could grow. And I discovered what I'd been unknowingly been hiding, that I was gay. Now, my parents never got to see who I am today. And if my dad were sat here today, I don't for a second think he'd be any less proud of me. Would you, Dad? I'm not a passenger in my own life, and I'm not going to let autopilot control who I am or force me to be someone that I'm not. Our autopilot is a powerful tool to keep us safe, to help us fit in, but it is not in control. Whether it's a devastating loss, a crushing divorce, a career twist, our worst days do not need to break us. So whatever it is in your life, I hope that you can see those warning lights when they come up. I hope you can turn your autopilot off. And I hope you can take control to become a person that you can believe in and be truly proud of. Good luck.